So who here has published a book before? Show of hands. I didn't even know that. Amazing. Oh, amazing, even better. So who here has thought about writing a book or would like to publish a book? Awesome. Thank you very much. So obviously it's a Friday night. It's, 8 o'clock. We're apparently hitting some snow while we leave. So thank you for being here tonight. Obviously joining Crua, the rest of the speakers, and myself. Today I'm here to talk about writing and publishing your own book. And specifically, I'm here to share how to get started writing a book, some of the things that you should consider when you're talking to publishers and questions that you should ask them, and the process of marketing yourself in order to drive sales for your book. But before we get started with that, I wanted to see if it's okay if I share a little bit about my journey as a real estate investor, entrepreneur, and of course as an author. You good with that? Before I dive into the heavy stuff? All right, so like I said, we're just going to kind of go through some of these details on tackling writing a book. It sounds like Judith would be a good resource over here to talk to you as well afterwards. So in terms of my story, so the opening line of my book is, I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, but it tarnished. And I know that sounds harsh, but it's something that my stepmother said to me when I was 6 years old. So you can see here, I'm with my brother. He was 4 years older than I was. And I was pretty much born into a super normal family in the 80s. We lived in Upper Malvern, so really perfectly nuclear home. And really our world fell apart when I was 4 years old, just about to turn 5, where my dad basically came home and told my mom that he was in love with somebody else and packed his bags and literally walked out on us. And, my mom at that point in time was a single mother and literally got like one of those memos or whatever that they come to your door the next day, a telegram, to say she'd been taking off my dad's benefits. Really, really struggled there for the first year after when he had left. And basically they ended up selling our family home. He ended up buying a rural property in Stouffville with my stepmom. And I guess because it was such a large property, my brother thought it was very, very cool, and he asked if he could go and live with them. So this would have been just over a year later, and things went from bad to worse. So I woke up one night, I was living with my mom at this point in time in Ajax, and I woke up to the sounds of screaming. And I was only 6 years old, and all I could hear was, I'm gonna kill myself, I'm gonna kill myself. And she was kind of shouting this to her boyfriend at the time, and I didn't know what happened. And I was basically taken to an aunt and uncle's house that just lived around the corner from us, and for a couple days I stayed with them, not knowing what had happened. And then I was brought home, I was dressed up, and they said, we're going for a drive. And all I remember is we're going from the suburbs, we're driving out to the country, and I basically walk into this venue, and there's family there, there's extended family and friends and things like that, and my brother's laying in a casket. So that kind of was really life-shattering at that point in time, as everyone can imagine. And essentially what happened is he got home from school, and he was an adventurous 10-year-old boy, and instead of going to the neighbor's house like he was told to do if nobody was home, he decided to go into the barn and take out the riding lawnmower. And obviously he didn't know how to drive, so he pulled the wrong way out of the barn, and the tractor trailer tipped over and fell down a hill, and as I understand it, either landed on top of him or pinned him down close to a post, and he broke his neck. What I learned after the fact, actually after my book later on came out, this wasn't an isolated situation with him being home alone. He had actually been found alone on the property the day before he died by my uncle, and they had taken him home and baked cookies with him, and they told me that, they just wanted me to know that he had a good last day on earth. Like, they baked Halloween cookies, they took him to school the next day. And what really struck me is that the day he died was actually Black Monday. It was October the 19th, 1987. So if he was home alone on a Sunday, that means that my stepmom and my dad would have left him home alone. It's not like he came home from school and they weren't home yet. So I don't know if this was a repeated situation, but it really begs the question of if it was negligent or really what happened. But ultimately, that's what happened. My mom was devastated. She threw herself on the gravesite. I fainted. We both landed in the hospital. And I think she really did the best that she could to raise me over the next year. But, she found it very, very difficult and essentially had to go and live with my dad and my stepmom a year later. So I was supposed to only be living with my dad and my stepmom temporarily, so I guess my mom decided that she wanted to try to regain custody of me, but she really didn't go through the proper channels. So instead of sending me home after Labor Day weekend going into grade 4, she just decided that she's going to stay living with her. Obviously, you can't do that with the court system, so that lasted about 6 weeks, and we went through a struggle with custody, but essentially I was sent back to live with my dad and my stepmom and now the family that they had started together. Now, as time had progressed, my relationship with my stepmom grew increasingly challenging. She was bipolar, and my dad was working a lot, so oftentimes I was home alone with her daughter and the son that they had together. And there was a lot of instances of like verbal abuse and physical abuse and things like that. So as time was passing, I think it became really apparent that it wasn't a healthy environment for me to be in, but I also couldn't go and live with my mom. So I had an aunt and uncle that approached me and said, you know, obviously you're in this difficult situation, so why don't you try and come and live with us? They kind of did the same thing. Labor Day weekend came along. Instead of going back to my dad's, I just stayed with them. And this had been in the works for a few months, so I had been, you know, shifting clothes over and things like that over a course of a few months every time I went for a visit. But they hired a lawyer to charge my stepmother with assault. We went through custody proceedings, and after about 6 weeks, they were granted custody of me. So I was basically now living with technically my new family because I couldn't live with my mom, and I obviously didn't want to stay with my dad and my stepmom. Now, what I learned through this whole experience is when you're living with people who are not your parents, I wasn't like an orphan, I wasn't in foster care, it was nothing as challenging as that, but it does teach you that you don't want to ask for anything more than what's already being provided for you. So I had a roof over my head, I had my shelter, but if I wanted to buy clothes, if I wanted to have spare money or anything like that, I really wanted to be able to provide for myself. So I was out there working when I was, you know, like Brandon, 14 years old, getting jobs. I was volunteering everywhere. I ended up getting a scholarship that covered more than half of my tuition, ironically, from Deer Creek Homes. So from one of the big home builders that we have out in Durham region, which is kind of ironic now being a real estate investor all of these years later. But I went to school for journalism and was able to kind of put myself through. So what I didn't know is that journalism is not the easiest career to get into. And I had been working events part-time all the way through university, so it literally became my backup plan. I had a really close call with AM 640. That was probably my closest call. And when that didn't pan out, I took the opportunity to become a manager at the agency that I later came to own. So I started as a part-time brand ambassador, became an account manager, and then 6 months in, the woman who started the company asked me to partner with her. And the benefit of partnering on a company that has no income really is that I just assumed half of the debt instead of buying into the company. And within a year, we started to book really big events with Motorola and Rogers. We were working in this instance with Chin Radio, so we were planning a couple of big stage productions. And then 4 years later, the woman who founded the company decided to actually leave. So the timing of it was all really ironic. I actually bought my first house, and a week later, she said she wanted to go out for lunch, and she's like, I'm pregnant. It's like, what? It's like, that was a surprise. So she decided when it was time to come back to work that she just didn't want to come back to work. So basically in 2008, as everyone knows, there was a world financial crisis and we went into a recession, and I was faced with buying out my business partner just 4 years into running the company, and I think I was only 26 at the time. So I ended up taking it over, and we just continued to grow. So this picture here is from the first office space that we actually purchased back in 2015. So I was able to grow the business during that time and started hiring employees and started delegating and things like that. Now, where did real estate investing come into the picture? I think, you know, because I had had my challenges with my family, I really just wanted stability and a place to call my own. So buying my first house was really like my number one goal in life. And beyond that, I just never thought of owning anything beyond that. But then I had a coach that I was working with, and she said, you know, most businesses only operate on 3 months, and you have 18 months of operating costs in your business. And I was like, well, like I always want to be able to pay my bills. Like, what if no sales come in? And I really just didn't know, like, you don't know what you don't know, right? So she said, well, if you're not comfortable taking out that much, why don't you take out enough that maybe you leave yourself a buffer of 6 months or 8 months? So I was trying to think with this surplus, what would make sense? And at this point in time, the dollar was par. It may not be something we see in our lifetimes again, but the dollar was par in the States, and they had also still not completely recovered from 2008. So I ended up buying a condo in Florida when the dollar was par for about $120,000, $27,000, and I was ultimately able to buy it for cash and then rent it out as a short-term rental. So then after 4 years of keeping it, I sold it, and I was back to square one. I had no idea what to do. And my agency actually started staffing events with this company that most of you probably know. So Keyspire. Sure, I'd seen Scott McGillivray. I knew what income property was. I had no idea what Keyspire was. But they were staffing events in Texas and Florida with our team, so that instead of sending one person from their events team, they could basically lean on our staff for support. So they'd have 5 or 6 people in all these different cities when they did their wealth tour. And then I started seeing ads for their wealth tour coming to Toronto, and I thought, you know, I have parked all this money from the sale of the condo because I just don't know what to actually do next. So I went to their wealth tour where, of course, they give you a taste of all these different things pertaining to real estate investing, but they don't give it away. So I signed up for the 2-day course, and then as everybody knows, that leads you into their very expensive membership. And of course, I was like, I'm not spending $35,000 on the spot. Are you crazy? So I stepped away, and I just looked for people on Facebook and on LinkedIn that basically indicated that they were members that I felt like I could trust that were not highly commissioned sales consultants. And lo and behold, I found a woman named Lori Mae Paroff that was actually the mother-in-law of one of my staff. So go figure. So I felt like she was someone that I could really trust and just really take at face value if it would be worth it. And she was a member from 2012, and she basically said that she had grown her portfolio from 9 doors upwards, I think, to like 30-something doors. She's sitting now around the 55 door mark. So I decided to move forward. You know, I got past the sticker shock, and I went to my first investor summit, and I took a lot of action. So I basically bought 2 pre-construction properties, and I invested in a land development deal. This is one of the properties that I kept and tenanted in Edmonton and held on to for 4 years, and did a few syndicated mortgages, and then beyond that was introduced to private lending through a mortgage broker. And in the last, I guess, 5 years, I've done about 70 private lending deals. So for me, that became kind of the focus for my real estate investing, and obviously I've got future plans. However, at the first investor summit, there was a woman there that was hosting a booth, and she was basically positioning herself as a ghostwriter for Michael Saraceni and Scott McGillivray, but she also was the ghostwriter for Michael Gerber's E-Myth, and she was hosting a writing retreat in San Diego. And I thought, my whole life, people had always told me, like, your childhood is so crazy. Of course, like one day you have to write a book about this. So in the back of my mind, it was always there that I had to tell my story and maybe it would resonate with people. But it also paved the path into entrepreneurship, and it kind of made me say yes to everything because I was always trying to pay my bills and get ahead. So I thought that those things could be really intertwined in terms of how my childhood and those challenges really kind of led into this life of entrepreneurship and all the things I learned by running my agency. So I basically holed up in an Airbnb for 3 days, hammered out 17 chapters of what became 31 chapters of my book. And when I came back, I finished it, and then I hit a wall when it came to publishing. And I just didn't know what to do. It seemed really expensive to move it forward. Beyond that point, I literally just shelved it for a little while. In the meantime, my business continued to grow. So we were kind of on a fairly big growth path. From 2014 to 2022, we ended up winning 18 awards. So a number of different factors that kind of went along with that. We grew to 10 full-time employees, 2,200 part-time staff. We had an office space in Pickering that was just 5 minutes from my house. So I really didn't have time to even think about the book. So I did it, but it was just somewhere buried on our server for a while. And I kind of felt like I was at the point where I could start a family. And I had my daughter in December of 2019. And then the world shut down. So I had this big and busy business, and then all of a sudden, lockdown happened, and you can no longer run in-person events. And for the kind of events that we ran, like, there was just no way to pivot. Like, we weren't the company out there running conferences that could adapt virtually. And I know a lot of our clients that did really well kind of moving towards that platform, but for us, it was just literally nothing that we could do. So I had to make decisions very, very quickly. We had about $300,000 or $400,000 in booked business that was already in progress of being planned that literally disappeared in a matter of days. Over $1 million in our pipeline that completely disappeared. And I had about 4 months of operating costs in the bank account. So I had to decide what I'm gonna do. I also was still in a lease at our new office space that we'd been in for a couple of years. So I was looking at a $5,000 a month rental fee for that. So I basically let my entire team go except for one person. And I just told them, of course I don't want to do this, but I need to leave ourselves enough money that we can get through this, because it could take 2 months and we all come back to work, but I need to make sure we have enough that we can get to the other side of this. So I kept one girl that basically took care of things for me while I was with my daughter, who was only 3 months old at the time. And we just rode the waves of lockdown after lockdown for a couple of years. And since it came to a standstill, I made 2 commitments. So one of them was to get my real estate license, because it seemed complementary to everything that I'd been doing in terms of real estate investing. And of course, I had to commit to getting my book finished. So basically, I would take 2 mornings a week to sit at my empty office. It was actually kind of similar to this office. When I walked in, it was a little bit crazy. But I go sit in my office for 3 hours, 2 mornings a week, while my husband watched our daughter. And I rotated between the courses for my real estate license and editing for my book. And I basically got that taken care of. I think both of them coincided about 10 months after COVID happened. So even though I had the infant at home, I was able to take care of these 2 things. Which brings me to some of the important things in terms of why should you write a book? So I think number one, for anyone that is considering this, I think it builds credibility. So just like things like social media, podcasts, having a book is just one of the best things that you can do to build credibility and really show people that you've got the ability to commit and see something through. I think there's actually nothing cooler. Instead of giving out a business card, you can say, well, here's a copy of my book. So if you're meeting with a potential investor or a client or whatever it is, obviously it drives business. So I think it's a testament to the kind of workmanship that you can do. It demonstrates you as a thought leader. So I think there's a lot of different ways that a book can potentially help you depending on what your objective is. Okay, in terms of planning, so I think the idea of writing a book can be really intimidating when people just sit in front of a blank page and it's like, I've got 300 pages to write. So the way that I basically approached this is I came up with an Excel document and I came up with all of the topics for all of my chapters and just kind of the general topics in terms of like what I would write about that. So I had the general framework from the very beginning. So it's very easy to sit down and write 8 pages or 10 pages at a time to be like, this is chapter 1, this is chapter 2. So basically just having that. The other thing that I was instructed is just to let the writing flow. So don't sit there, write a sentence, go back and change it, worry about your punctuation and your commas and your periods and all of that stuff. Just let the writing flow. Don't even go back and read anything. Just write it out chapter after chapter. And then once you're finished that, you can go back and take care of things from an editing perspective. One thing I would say, like in my instance, because my book was factual, if you plan on changing any names, do yourself a favor and do it from the beginning. I did not, and it was a pain after, because I'm like, there's 3 Kristens I know, or there's this, and obviously from a legal perspective, you want to make sure that you're protected, but it's much easier to do that from the beginning than going back afterwards. Even if you can replace words, there could be duplicates and stuff like that, so that was a big lesson. Now, in terms of publishing, so I ended up going the route of using a self-published organization that I understood was in British Columbia. I was like, great, they're Canadian. They actually outsource most of their team, I believe, to the Philippines, which is fine. Like, obviously, there's some disconnect in terms of maybe language here and there, but it was definitely a bit of a different experience than I thought. And at the time, there's things that weren't clear. So basically, you have options where you have certain levels of control over the book, or there's levels of control that they can use to market and sell the book with the retailers. And at the time, I didn't worry about it. I was like, well, I want them to manage it. Like, I don't want anything to do with this. Now, the challenge has been is that you have no control over how it's optimized. So I think that was one challenge that I learned is like after the fact, I want to go in and be able to change things to make sure that I'm driving sales, but because they can't give me access to it because it's all of their authors, that's a limitation. So I think it's something to understand that you want to make sure you understand the rights that you have to have access to your own listings, or at least be able to work with someone to go through those listings with you, just to make sure if you want to tweak things down the road, maybe 6 months, a year, 2 years down, what that looks like. It may help to also talk to some of the other authors to see what their experience has been like, and maybe talk to people that are on both sides of it. Basically how you can adapt to that now is that you have to register a new ISBN number, which is basically how your book is circulated worldwide. So it would be a little bit challenging to try to change it after the fact. But you just want to understand what that could look like if you do want to make any changes. When I did approach them about this, they just said, we're a publisher, we're just focused on getting your book published and out there. They don't care about the sales. Like once they've made the money for getting you out there, like it doesn't matter to them if you sell 1 million books or 10 books. So I think you just want to understand if they're going to actually help you drive the sales when it comes to optimizing things or maybe pay-per-click ads and things like that. In terms of editing, so I went through something called substantive editing, and that goes 2 rounds. So one is for content, and then the second is really for spelling and grammar. And what I would say is, in my instance, they gave me a draft copy of the book. Before you are moving forward with actually getting it out there and publishing it, give it to like, honestly, 4 or 5 people, because it doesn't matter how many times your editor or you've gone through things, there will still be things that can come up that could be easily missed, whether it's like a word missing, an extra word, like just little things that like a spell check is never going to catch. So I gave it to a few different people in my family to read, and I think I caught about 15 mistakes before it actually went live that, you know, nobody wants to go back and be like, like it's just that word. So definitely try to get extra eyes on that. And also know after the fact that even if you just want to change something as simple as a word, it can actually affect the design of the book. So you want to make sure that those changes are done before the actual layout of the book is completed, because it can have a very significant impact after, and they'll start charging you if you decide like, oh, I wanted to add a sentence or anything like that. Really make sure it is in its entirety before you get to that last step. In this case, the cover and all the design and all of that was done with the publishing company as well. I think just like having the book edited, it's good practice to just feel out what people think is like a good book cover and what the colors look like and things like that, just to make sure it's polished and professional. In terms of promoting sales for the book, so obviously you can lean on your email database. For me, I do have past clients, staff, and people from LinkedIn that I have in an email database, so I always include links for the book there. Social media is a big thing as well. Like I started my Instagram page for the book about 4 to 5 months prior to the book coming out. And what I did was little sneak peeks of the different topics of the book, and I would do live readings. So I would read like a few sentences from each chapter and basically did the post for 4 to 5 months leading up to the book actually coming out so that people could have like curiosity, interest, and things like that. So when it came out, it actually is like coming out. In order to be, I don't know if I cover this after, but if you want to be an Amazon bestseller, the trick is really just the most number of sales in a 24-hour window. And it's literally like if you surpass that, your Amazon bestseller badge disappears. So if you get to number 1, like you snapshot that, you screenshot it, because then it's gone and you can't necessarily see it back. So the main focus is that you want to drive people to buy that book that one day. Like really try to push people like, this is the day it's coming out, everybody please buy it. In my instance, I think it got confusing because the book came out and then I was trying to direct people like a week later. So I got up to I think number 18 or something like that in entrepreneurship. But the category that you choose also matters. So you could choose a category for your book that's less competitive. So business or entrepreneurship could be more competitive than say, whatever else is the category. But I'm just saying like you want to be in one where you stand a chance at being an Amazon bestseller. And if you also put a really low cost on an ebook, so something like $1 or $2, that still counts towards your sales. So even though it's not really cheating, but it's not like a $20 paperback, but you can sell people like $1 and sell like 300 of those and it could probably get you to number 1. This is also the reason that I started to go on podcasts, because I thought, well, if I'm on other people's podcasts, then I'm getting in front of their audiences. That's how I met like Judith, who's here today, and got in front of a lot of other people. But I think I've done about 45 podcasts in the last year and a half with different people in Canada and now across the States. Initially, I used a specific website where you could apply to things. And then because I did so many, I just started to get asked to be on them. So it was kind of an interesting plan there. But there is a website called podcastguest.com where you can apply, you can have your profile where people can like approach you. The quality of them were so-so, but like I said, just by being out there, you'll start to get seen and start being asked to be on other things. One thing that I use also for the podcast and different applications, I use a book backgrounder and things to do with the book cover. So it basically gives people an idea of what your book is all about. And it's just a way that you can kind of stand apart from other people that are applying that are just like, hey, I want to be on your podcast. You can be like, well, I'd like to be on your podcast. Here's my book. And then also using something called a one sheet. And basically it gives an overall biography on you, as well as potential topics that you're comfortable speaking about. So for me, obviously, I'll talk about private lending, leveraging your business to invest, pros and cons in pre-construction, investing in the States, growing your network. So a lot of those things could vary depending on what you're looking to do, but you just want to be able to give people almost like your resume and what your possible talking points are. I think at the end of the day, people have big egos. You can also flatter them and say, I saw this specific podcast. I really, really love that you said this. So it's also nice, instead of it just being all about you, make it all about the hosts that you're also applying to and compliment them on some of their past podcasts. And like I said, I wasn't sure if I included this, but this is just more details in terms of being an Amazon bestseller. So when I went to the writing retreat in San Diego, this is some of the stuff that Helen had basically walked us through. So I didn't make it there. My mentor actually with my real estate business has made it there, but this is apparently the secret sauce to getting to be an Amazon bestseller. And that's basically it. So for anyone that does want to connect, here are some of my different link trees. So I have obviously just my general one, and then I've got one specific to my book, Serena Holmes Author. And then more recently, in the last 6 months, I launched a podcast called Inspire to Invest, and it's specifically to sharing stories about real estate investors, because I think they're really inspiring. And I just think it's really valuable to be able to show people how they can get started. Like, if someone hadn't suggested it to me, I wouldn't be here today. So ideally, I want to put that bug into other people's ears as well. Thank you. And I guess we'll raffle for the book as well. So thanks for everyone for this. I thought we had raffle tickets, but we don't. So we'll just do that. Okay, set this down. So the first one, we got Desiree Davis. Woo-hoo. Thank you. And I think Ella's actually got the books over here. Thank you.
And let me just show you.
Okay, and for the second one, Judith.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Awesome.
How do you see the 2024 coming, and from the perspective of real estate, what is your opinion about that?
Yeah.
And especially, how would you protect yourself if you're a private lender?
Yeah, so I had, like I said, been on lots of podcasts in the last little while, and I did about 60 private lending deals in the first 5 years, maybe another 10 in the last 6 to 8 months. And honestly, in the first 60 deals, everything went totally smooth. If anything, everything was paid on time or early, consistently. And in the last 6 months, let's just say they haven't. So I am definitely looking to, oh dear, I'm scared.
Sorry, I'm too early to the party.
It's like, what's happening? Yeah, so everything's definitely changed. A lot of the private lends I have done are with real estate investors. And I think for anyone here who is an active real estate investor, refinancing is taking longer. Mortgages have in some instances tripled. Your cash flow may be non-existent. There's a lot of different things that are happening, and it's created a lot of challenges for the active real estate investors and now for also the private lenders who are expecting that interest. So I do have a few different situations that have arisen. So it's really made me just shift my perspective on how to move forward with that, and just looking at things that are more secure options like first and second position mortgages, as opposed to, say, promissory notes, and just really reconsidering just what kind of things are out there, maybe things that are more secured in a GP-LP type of arrangement. I do think diversification is key, and if you're married, even diversify further if you keep your money separate, just so that, say you and your husband have money together or separate, just diversify, do the minimums. It's better to do 10 deals than 2 deals. Just try to split it up as much as possible, and obviously get to know the people that you're working with, understand the scope of their portfolios, what their contingency plans are, and all of that, because nobody expected mortgage rates to go up as quickly as they did and as much as they did. So I think everyone's just trying to grapple with that. So I think my word was just patience. So I think everyone is coming from a good place, and we're just trying to work through it the best way we can.